The cruise ship's horn echoed across the harbor like a funeral bell, deep and mournful, vibrating through my chest as I stood on the weathered wooden dock. The salt air stung my eyes. Or maybe those were tears I refused to acknowledge. In my trembling hand was a confirmation number printed on cream. Colored paper, the kind Rachel always used for special occasions, as if expensive stationery could elevate any situation. She had handed it to me 3 days before, with that practiced smile of hers, the one that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. Everything was arranged, she would said, her voice bright with false enthusiasm. The whole extended family would be there. Michael's 40th birthday celebration, 2 weeks sailing through azure Caribbean waters, visiting islands I would only seen in travel magazines. His brothers and their wives, people who had grown distant over the years as their own lives consumed them. The grandchildren I rarely saw anymore. Teenagers now who looked at their phones more than they looked at me. Even Michael's assistant, Jennifer, had somehow become essential enough to earn a cabin. A woman 20 years younger than me who called him by his first name and knew his schedule better than his own mother did. But not me. 67 years old, the woman who had given birth to the man being celebrated. And somehow I wasn't worth a cabin reservation. But not me. The ticket agent, a young woman with kind eyes and professionally straightened hair, stared at her computer screen with the kind of endless patience reserved for difficult elderly customers who couldn't figure out technology. Her fingers clicked across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, while I stood there feeling smaller with each passing second. She explained gently, her voice carefully modulated to avoid any hint of condescension, that my confirmation was for shore excursions only, not passage. No cabin reservation existed under my name, Eleanor Hartwell. She offered to check again, typing slowly so I could see her thoroughness. She tried different spellings, different booking reference numbers, even cross-referenced with the family booking. Nothing. I watched her face shift from professional helpfulness to confused sympathy as the reality became clear. Someone had deliberately excluded me from the reservation while making sure I would show up at the dock with false hope. I called Michael's cell phone, straight to voicemail, as if he would already switched it off for vacation mode. I tried Rachel, his wife, the same automated greeting in her chirpy voice, telling me to leave a message. 47 minutes. I waited on that wooden bench, watching families wheel their luggage toward the gangway. Watching couples check their boarding passes twice. 3 times, making sure everything was perfect. The kind of careful attention I used to receive when I mattered. When Michael was 12, and I was the most important person in his universe. Before marriage changed his priorities and money shifted his loyalties. The ship pulled away from the dock at exactly 3:15, right on schedule. I could see figures waving from the upper decks. But none of them was looking for me. I took the shuttle back to the parking garage, paid the daily rate, drove home through traffic that moved like thick honey. The house felt different when I returned, like walking into a memory that didn't quite fit anymore. Not just quiet, abandoned, the silence had weight to it, pressing down on everything I would thought was secure. Every family photograph on the mantel seemed to mock me with images of birthday parties and graduations where I would been central, important, loved. I moved through rooms that suddenly felt too large, past furniture William and I had chosen together, when we still believed family meant forever. The dining room where we would hosted every holiday dinner. The living room where Michael had opened Christmas presents as a child, where I would read him bedtime stories until he decided he was too old for such things. That evening, around 6:30, a white florist's van with cheerful green lettering pulled into my driveway. The delivery boy looked no older than 16, struggling with a massive arrangement that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Tropical flowers in an elaborate basket, birds of paradise with their bright orange streaks, like flames against emerald leaves, exotic blooms I couldn't name that smelled like vacation destinations I would never visit. The card nestled among the stems was thick stock paper with embossed edges. Inside, in Rachel's perfect handwriting, "Sorry for the mix-up. Thought you decided to stay home. Love, M and R. Love." as if affection could be purchased by the stem and delivered with a teenager's apology. No phone call to explain what had happened. No genuine concern for how I would felt standing at that dock. Just flowers and the casual assumption that being forgotten could be covered with $25 worth of blooms that would wilt within a week. I left them on the porch. 2 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox inside. A gift certificate to my local grocery store. $100. No signature. Just a sticky note that said, "Treat yourself," in Rachel's looping handwriting. Like I was a child who needed pocket money after being excluded from the grown-ups' table. The next week, postcards started arriving. Glossy images of white sand beaches and crystal blue water. Generic messages about having a wonderful time and missing me. Each one felt like salt in a wound that wasn't healing. Michael finally called on day 9 of their trip. His voice carried that forced cheerfulness people use when they are pretending nothing's wrong. He claimed there had been confusion with the travel agent. Multiple bookings last minute changes. He suggested I plan something nice for myself with the gift certificate they would send. Maybe a little getaway of my own. Something more my speed. More my speed, like age had reduced me to bus tours and buffet restaurants. I made myself tea and didn't mention that I would already started looking into things. Because when someone you trusted for 67 years treats you like an afterthought, you start wondering what else they might have forgotten to tell you. 3 weeks after they returned, tanned and relaxed and full of stories I wasn't part of, the certified mail arrived. The envelope was heavy cream paper with the letterhead of Hartwell Community Arts Center embossed in deep blue ink. The cultural organization Michael and I had established 8 years ago, using his father's insurance money and every penny of my retirement savings. We would spend months converting the old train depot downtown into a performance space and art gallery, painting walls ourselves and installing theater lights we would bought at auction. I remembered the day we would sign the founding documents, sitting at my kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. Michael had been enthusiastic then, full of ideas about bringing culture to our small town. He would talk about music festivals and poetry readings, art classes for children whose schools couldn't afford programs. We would named it after William, honoring the man who would believed education and beauty could transform communities. Now, holding this formal notice, my hands shook as I read language that felt like a foreign language wrapped in legal terminology. New fiscal policies, updated governance structure, revised mission statements. The kind of formal language people use when they are changing everything without asking permission from the people who built it in the first place. My name appeared nowhere in the document. Not as co-founder, not as board member, not even in the acknowledgments section thanking past contributors. 8 years of my life, my money, my vision, erased as if I would never existed. I opened my laptop and navigated to the website I would help design. The About Us page had been completely rewritten. Sleeker photos of Michael shaking hands with city officials, a mission statement I would never seen before, references to visionary leadership and forward-thinking management. The original dedication to William Hartwell, my late husband, had been moved to a tiny footer. My name had vanished entirely, as if I would never existed. I spent that night in William's old study, surrounded by files and photographs. Every founding document still bore my signature. Every early financial record showed contributions from both our accounts. The deed to the building listed me as co-owner. Yet somehow, according to the internet, I had been erased from my own creation. The next morning, I called Margaret Chen, our family attorney. She would handled William's estate and knew our financial situation better than anyone. Her voice carried concern when I explained what I would discovered. She asked me to bring every document I could find. Original papers, bank records, correspondence. She wanted to see everything before drawing any conclusions. That afternoon, I spread 20 years of paperwork across her conference table. Margaret studied each sheet with the methodical attention of someone who had seen this story before. After 2 hours, she looked up with the expression lawyers wear when delivering bad news. Michael had filed papers to restructure the foundation 6 months ago. He would claimed sole ownership, based on a transfer agreement I would supposedly signed during my recent bout with pneumonia. The signature looked enough like mine to pass casual inspection, but Margaret noticed discrepancies in the pen pressure and letter formation. Someone had practiced my handwriting, someone who had seen me sign documents hundreds of times over the years. The foundation wasn't just being reorganized, it was being monetized. Michael had negotiated a development deal with the city. The historic train depot would be demolished and replaced with luxury condominiums. The arts programs would relocate to a smaller space across town. The insurance settlement from the sale would flow into accounts I couldn't access. Money William and I had intended for community enrichment would line Michael's pockets instead. Margaret explained my options in her careful, measured way. We could challenge the forged documents, but it would mean accusing my son of fraud. It would become public, messy. The kind of family drama that gets reported in small-town newspapers. I asked how long I had to decide. She said the development permits were being finalized next month. After that, stopping the sale would become much more complicated. I drove home through streets I would known for 40 years, past the elementary school where Michael learned to read, past the park where we would celebrated his college graduation, past the coffee shop where William proposed on a snowy December morning. Everything looked the same, but felt different, like discovering your neighbor's friendly dog has been biting people when you weren't watching. That evening, sitting in William's old study surrounded by shadows and memories, I didn't turn on the television or make my usual cup of chamomile tea. Instead, I sat in the leather chair he would loved, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne after all these years, and spread my checkbook across the mahogany desk. For the first time in months, I traced through every transaction with the methodical attention of someone looking for clues to a crime. Small things I would missed before suddenly gained terrible clarity, like puzzle pieces falling into place to reveal a picture I would never wanted to see. Michael had been handling more of my financial affairs lately, and I would been grateful for his help. Doctor visits where he insisted on speaking privately with my physician about my medications and mental state. Banking appointments where he suggested I add his name to certain accounts for convenience, in case something happened to me. Insurance reviews where he recommended policy changes for better coverage and simplified beneficiary arrangements. At the time, it felt like care, responsible adult children looking after their aging mother's well-being. Now, examining the paper trail with suspicious eyes, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like preparation, like someone systematically positioning themselves to take control when the opportunity arose. I found the manila folder of documents I would signed during my pneumonia recovery 3 months ago, when I would been weak and grateful for any help. Power of attorney forms that Michael had brought to my bedside, explaining they were just precautionary measures. Account modifications he would said would streamline my banking. What I would thought were routine updates to make things easier for my family if something happened to me. Reading them now, with full clarity and growing horror, I realized I would signed away more than convenience. I would given Michael legal authority over assets. I would spent a lifetime accumulating the arts center, my investment accounts, even the house William and I had bought as newlyweds and paid off with 40 years of careful saving. The next morning, I called Margaret again. This time, my voice carried certainty instead of confusion. I wanted to know exactly what had been taken and how to get it back. She scheduled a forensic accounting review for the following week. Meanwhile, she would file preliminary motions to freeze any transactions related to the Arts Center pending investigation of the signature discrepancies. I spent that week organizing my evidence, every receipt, every bank statement, every photograph of me at foundation events. Michael now claimed to have organized alone. The patterns became clearer each day. This hadn't been impulsive or opportunistic. It had been systematic, careful. The kind of long-term planning that requires seeing your victim as an obstacle rather than a person. The forensic accountant was a woman named Patricia Wong, mid-50s, with the kind of sharp attention to detail that made numbers tell stories. She spread my financial records across the conference table, like puzzle pieces, looking for patterns I would been too trusting to see. After 3 hours of methodical examination, Patricia had traced the theft back 18 months to a period when I would been dealing with a minor heart episode that had worried everyone. It started small, a few $100s here and there from my household account. Transfers Michael had disguised as bill paying assistance. He would been testing the waters, seeing how much he could move without triggering my attention or bank alerts. When I didn't notice or question the transfers, apparently too trusting of my own son to suspect theft, the amounts grew larger and more frequent. Investment accounts were liquidated and moved to holdings bearing his name. Insurance policies were adjusted to name him as primary beneficiary instead of the foundation. Savings bonds I would purchase decades ago were cashed and the proceeds redirected. The total approached $300,000. Money William and I had saved for the Arts Center's expansion. Penny by penny over 20 years of careful budgeting. Funds we would earmarked for scholarships and community programs, for the children's art classes and senior citizen music workshops that brought joy to people who couldn't afford cultural enrichment otherwise. Everything slowly, methodically redirected into Michael's personal control. Patricia's voice remained clinical and professional as she explained how the scheme worked, but I could see the disgust in her eyes. Michael had used his power of attorney to authorize transactions on my behalf, forging my signature when legal authorization wasn't sufficient. He would created an elaborate paper trail that made systematic theft look like voluntary gift, giving complete with tax forms and beneficiary documentation that would hold up to casual scrutiny. The most disturbing discovery came last, buried in spreadsheets that took Patricia 2 hours to untangle. Michael had been paying himself a salary from the foundation for 2 years, $2,500 monthly for administrative oversight of an organization he now claimed to have founded single-handedly. He would been stealing from the community while simultaneously erasing my contribution to it, taking credit and cash simultaneously with breathtaking audacity. He would been stealing from the community while erasing my contribution to it, taking credit and cash simultaneously. Margaret outlined our legal strategy with the precision of someone who had fought these battles before. We would file criminal complaints for forgery and embezzlement, civil suits to recover the stolen funds, injunctions to halt the property sale and restore my legal standing with the foundation. It would take months, possibly years. It would definitely become public. Michael's reputation in the community would be destroyed, along with any family relationship we might have salvaged. I asked if there was any possibility of resolving things privately. Margaret's expression suggested she would been waiting for that question. She explained that white-collar financial crimes rarely stayed quiet. Once victims decided to fight back, the choice was simple: accept the theft and move on, or pursue justice knowing it would cost me any remaining relationship with my son. I thought about William, who had always said that principles only mattered when defending them carried a price. I thought about the community artists whose programs would disappear if Michael's development deal proceeded. I thought about the elderly woman who had been left at the cruise dock like forgotten luggage. Then I signed the authorization forms. The legal papers were filed on a Tuesday morning in October. By noon, Michael had been served with notices freezing his access to the disputed accounts. His attorney called Margaret before 5 o'clock, requesting an emergency meeting. I didn't attend that first conference. Margaret felt it would be more productive if emotions stayed out of the initial negotiations. Michael's lawyer wanted to characterize everything as a misunderstanding between family members. Paperwork mix-ups, authorization miscommunications. Margaret wasn't interested in those explanations. She presented the forensic evidence methodically. Signature comparisons, transaction timelines, audio recordings from bank appointments where Michael had claimed authority to act on my behalf. By the end of the meeting, the tone had shifted from explanation to damage control. Michael's attorney asked what it would take to resolve things without criminal charges. Margaret's answer was simple: full restitution of stolen funds, restoration of my legal standing with the foundation, and permanent removal of Michael from any decision making authority over my affairs. The response came within 48 hours. Michael would agree to financial restitution but wanted to maintain his role with the Arts Center. He claimed that removing him would damage the organization's reputation and hurt community programs. I laughed when Margaret read me that proposal. Michael was worried about damaging the organization's reputation after spending 2 years systematically looting it. We countered with a revised offer: complete restitution plus penalties, full restoration of my foundation role, and Michael's permanent resignation from all positions. No negotiations, no compromises. Take it or face criminal prosecution. The silence stretched for a week. Then Michael called me directly, circumventing the attorneys entirely. His voice carried the same forced cheerfulness from the cruise ship conversation. But underneath, I heard something new. Desperation. He wanted to meet in person. Just the two of us. No lawyers. No formal discussions. He said we were family and should be able to work things out without strangers getting involved. I agreed to see him, but only at Margaret's office with her present. I wasn't interested in private conversations where his version of events could differ from mine later. He arrived 20 minutes late, looking like he would aged 5 years in 2 months. His usual confident posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone carrying too much weight. Margaret reviewed the evidence again. This time, Michael couldn't pretend confusion or misunderstanding. The pattern was too clear, too systematic. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked at me directly, asked if I really wanted to destroy our relationship over money that would just go to charity anyway. He said he would been planning to support the Arts Center's mission in different ways. More efficient ways. That is when I understood how completely he would rewritten our history in his mind. He genuinely believed he was entitled to manage assets I would contributed. He thought his vision for the foundation mattered more than honoring William's memory or respecting my wishes. He wasn't just a thief. He was a thief who felt justified in stealing. I told him I had 3 words for his proposal: criminal charges filed. The settlement agreement was signed the following Friday. Michael would return all stolen funds plus 20% penalties. He would resign from every position with the foundation and surrender all future claims to its assets or direction. Most importantly, he would sign a public statement acknowledging that the Arts Center had been founded and funded jointly by William and Eleanor Hartwell, not by him alone. The money transfer took 2 weeks to complete. Watching those numbers return to my accounts felt like watching stolen jewelry returned after a burglary. Technically mine again, but forever changed by the violation. The hardest part wasn't the financial recovery. It was accepting that the person I would trusted most in the world had been planning my erasure for years. Every helpful gesture, every expression of concern, every family gathering where he would seemed attentive and caring. All of it had been performance. I changed the locks on my house, updated my will to distribute assets to legitimate charities instead of family members who had already proven they couldn't be trusted, removed Michael's name from every emergency contact list and insurance form. The Arts Center reopened under new management 3 months later. We hired a professional director and established an independent board of community volunteers. The programs expanded instead of disappearing. Michael's name was removed from the donor recognition wall. In its place, we installed a plaque honoring William's vision for community enrichment through accessible arts education. I didn't attend the reopening ceremony. That chapter of my life needed to close quietly, without fanfare or public vindication. I would fought for the principle, not the applause. 6 months after the legal settlement, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Michael's daughter, my granddaughter, was getting married in the spring. The envelope was addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell in formal script, like I was a distant acquaintance rather than family. Inside, a handwritten note from the bride mentioned that they hoped I could attend, but understood if the family situation made things difficult. She wanted me to know she remembered the art classes I would funded at the center when she was in high school. I RSVP'd that I would attend, but only for the ceremony itself. I wouldn't participate in family photos or reception toasts where Michael would be present. This was about supporting her, not reconciling with him. The wedding was beautiful, simple, and elegant, with the kind of personal touches that showed careful planning rather than expensive consultants. I sat in the back row, left immediately after the ceremony, and mailed my gift separately. It was a scholarship fund in her name at the Arts Center, something that would continue making a difference long after family relationships had been forgotten. That evening, I didn't feel sad about missing the reception. I felt proud of drawing boundaries that honored both my granddaughter and my own self-respect. The cruise ship photos finally stopped arriving in my mailbox. The gift certificates and apologetic flower arrangements ceased. Michael seemed to understand that buying forgiveness wasn't possible when trust had been completely broken. I started volunteering at the literacy center across town, teaching reading to adult learners who would never had educational opportunities, people who appreciated patience and encouragement without expecting anything in return. It reminded me why I would wanted to support community programs in the first place. Education wasn't about buildings or board meetings. It was about giving people tools to build better lives for themselves. 1 year after the legal settlement, I received a phone call from a stranger. She introduced herself as Jennifer Martinez, a social worker who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. She had heard about my situation through Margaret and wondered if I would be willing to speak with other victims. Apparently, family financial exploitation was much more common than people realized. Adult children systematically stealing from aging parents while maintaining relationships that looked caring from the outside. Jennifer explained that many victims never fought back because they feared losing family connections entirely. They accepted theft as the price of maintaining relationships, even when those relationships were based on deception. She asked if I would consider sharing my story as part of educational workshops for seniors. Not the legal details, but the emotional journey of recognizing manipulation and finding the strength to defend yourself. I agreed, but only if we focused on empowerment rather than victimization. I didn't want to be portrayed as a helpless elderly woman who had been rescued by lawyers. I wanted to be an example of someone who would reclaim her own power. The first workshop was held at the community center in November. 15 people attended, mostly women over 60. Their stories sounded familiar. Children who would gradually assumed financial control, signatures requested for convenience, assets slowly redirected without clear explanation. What surprised me was how many had suspected something wrong, but convinced themselves they were being paranoid or ungrateful. They had been conditioned to doubt their own perceptions rather than trust their instincts. I told them what I wished someone had told me earlier, that age doesn't disqualify you from deserving honesty and respect. That financial abuse is still theft, even when committed by family members who claim to love you. The most important message was this: you don't have to choose between family relationships and personal dignity. Real family wouldn't force that choice on you in the first place. After the workshop, 3 attendees approached me privately. They wanted help connecting with attorneys and forensic accountants. They were ready to stop accepting theft disguised as care. I gave them Margaret's contact information and offered to support them through the process, because fighting back is easier when you know you are not alone. 6 months later, all 3 had recovered stolen assets and established protective legal barriers. One discovered her daughter had been stealing Social Security payments for 2 years. Another found that her son had been using her credit cards to fund his gambling addiction. The third learned that her power of attorney documents had been used to sell her house to cover investment losses she would never authorized. Each case was different, but the pattern was identical. Trust exploited gradually until it became systematic theft. None of them regretted pursuing justice, even though it meant ending relationships with exploitative family members. They would learn the difference between family who loved them and family who simply needed them. I continued volunteering with the workshops for 2 years, speaking to groups of seniors who were learning to trust their instincts and defend their autonomy, watching people discover they didn't have to accept disrespect as the price of maintaining relationships. The Arts Center flourished under independent management. The community programs expanded to serve 3 neighboring towns. The scholarship fund generated enough interest to support 12 students annually. William would have been proud of what we would build together and what I would fought to preserve. I never heard from Michael again after the legal settlement. No holiday cards, no birthday calls, no attempts at reconciliation. The silence felt like relief rather than loss. Sometimes people asked if I missed having family in my life. I explained that I would discover the difference between family and relatives. Family shows up when you need them. Relatives show up when they need something from you. Real family doesn't leave you at the dock and send flowers as an apology. They don't forge your signature and call it convenience. They don't erase your contributions and claim your achievements. I built a new kind of family through the workshop participants, volunteer coordinators, and community members whose lives intersected with mine through shared values rather than shared genetics. These relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine care. Nobody was performing affection to maintain access to my resources. Nobody was calculating how to benefit from my trust. On quiet evenings, I sat in William's study surrounded by photographs and documents that told the real story of our life together. The Arts Center we would founded, the community programs we would supported, the scholarships we would funded. Michael could steal money and forge signatures, but he couldn't steal the legacy we would actually created. That belonged to the students who would learn to paint, the musicians who would found their voices, the writers who would discovered their stories. The most valuable things cannot be embezzled or erased. They live in changed lives and expanded possibilities. If you are reading this and something in my story sounds familiar, I want you to know that age doesn't disqualify you from defending yourself. Trust your instincts when relationships start feeling one-sided. Don't accept explanations that make you feel confused about your own memories. Financial abuse thrives in silence and isolation. It depends on victims believing they have no options, or that fighting back would cost them everything that matters. The truth is simpler. Anything you lose by defending yourself wasn't worth keeping in the first place. You don't need anyone's permission to protect what is yours. You don't need anyone's approval to demand honesty and respect. And you definitely don't need to accept theft as the price of maintaining relationships. Your dignity isn't negotiable. Your autonomy isn't transferable. Your voice matters, regardless of your age or your family's expectations. I learned these lessons later than I should have, but not too late to matter. If my story helps even one person recognize their own strength and refuse to accept being diminished, then everything I went through will have served a purpose. The cruise ship sailed without me, but I found my way to destinations that mattered more. Sometimes the best journey starts when you stop waiting for someone else to remember your ticket. Watch her Light channel for more stories about finding your strength when family fails you. And remember, you are never too old to choose yourself first.